In this class I want to talk about budgeting and introduce the idea of budgeting and some of its characteristics, some of its purposes and some of its uses. This class fits with several other classes on budgeting included on the site. So we'll start by looking at the purposes of budgeting. Well, budgets enable management to control actual costs and revenue when they arise. And the budgets do this by enabling the management to compare the actual figure with the budgeted figure. So what the management are looking for are gaps between what was budgeted and what actually happened. And in that way, management can control or attempt to control costs when they arise. Now, the purpose of budgets may include to establish, say, new financial plans. Planning is very important in the business, and generally speaking, businesses issue plans once a year. But the plans may be for a one-year period or an intermediate term, such as, say, 2 or 3 years, and a long term, which could be, say, 5 years and above. But the planning process is facilitated by budgeting because the figures from the budgets will influence the design of the plan, because the budgets tell the planners what happened, what was, if it's possible or if it's impossible to achieve certain objectives given certain budget allocations. Certainly the budgets allocate resources. That's the idea of the budget, that there is an allowance for a certain resource and there is some sort of check on the budget holder, on the manager responsible, that he or she does not exceed that allocated budget. So resources are allocated through budgets. And the effectiveness of management in achieving outcomes met within the budget is a measure of their performance. So measuring the performance of management can be done by looking to what extent the management have come in under budget. Let's say not spent all of the allocated sum, or did not exceed the budget significantly. But certainly the effectiveness of management can be gauged through their management of the budget. And of course, the plans of the business are quantified. Budgets are in quantitative terms. They're in money terms. So that if the plan states the objectives, then in order to make the plan operational, it must be converted into budgets, and the budgets are quantifiable. So we have, in a sense, quantifiable plans. And the budgets, of course, communicate the future financial position. If a budget is running over significantly, then it's likely to impact adversely on the final set of accounts. So some corrective action could be taken to ameliorate or to reduce that overspend, perhaps in the process of the year, not waiting to the end and totting it up, just allowing it to happen. But management can intervene when there is a significant overspend to try and deal with that and thereby reduce the impact on the final accounts. And of course, budgets can forecast and control future business performance. They can forecast it because once information has flown into the various budgets, then management is working with less unknowns. The figures have come in, the real actual figures are in the budgets, the allocated figures are in the budgets, so the they can forecast the future slightly more accurately, because just allowing for inflation or allowing for certain changes in the market or aspects that they know about in the coming year, they're able to take the existing figures and apply them into the next year. They may also control the performance of the business and of the managers by their ability to meet the budgeted targets or not to meet them. Now, the businesses coordinate their activities through formalized plans and budgets. Budgeting has two main roles. The budgets, they give authority to budget managers to incur expenditure on their part of the organization. So the budget managers have authority to spend. It's a form of delegation. It's a management style which sees the top management, the middle management, and the lower management as all having areas of responsibility. And the more responsibility, I guess, the bigger the budget. But the manager has responsibility for spending out of the budget, and the manager will be held to account according to how he or she manages that budget. But budgets also provide targets for revenue generating parts of the organization. So without revenue generation, the business won't exist, and therefore the budgets will have nothing in them. So in order to meet the targets of the business, in order to meet the objectives of the business, revenues must be generated, and the budgets indicate what is necessary to manage the business, to run the business. If the revenue is projected to be less than what the budgets require, then the business can't exist. The budgets act as comparators for current performance by providing a yardstick against which current activities can be monitored. So current activities can be checked against the budgets. The budgets are a yardstick. They enable measurement to see whether the managers are effective or not, and whether the business is doing well or not. So budgeting seems to be extremely important in the business context. Budgets are normally seen in 3 time periods. These are fairly standard time periods which we meet in all sorts of areas in business studies. But in the short term, say 1 year or less, they look at the short-term control of the organization's operating area performance. So short-term budgets will be looking at current expenditures, looking at what's happening right now, and looking at the budget that's allocated for the functioning business right now. So it will include budgets for labour, raw materials, production, equipment, transport, administration, marketing, and so on. And these budgets are what enable the business to function at this moment in time, in the short term. In the medium term, which is a bit longer, perhaps over a year, perhaps going up to 5 years, it depends on how it's defined. Now this emphasizes the balance between capital and current expenditure, because the business may need to invest to survive in the long run, but it also must meet current expenditure. It must pay for utilities, it must pay for gas, electricity, and for the vehicles in transport, and so on. So there's a balance between how much can be invested and how much can be spent currently. So the medium-term budget brings out that. It makes it explicit. And the medium term also looks at the current operational and strategic gaps. It looks at what is happening now and what management anticipated that would happen. And those gaps can be addressed in the medium term. They can't perhaps be addressed immediately because the resources are not available or because it is difficult. It is difficult technically, it's difficult financially, it's difficult in terms of labour. It's just difficult to make the changes immediately. But in the medium term, those changes can be phased in. In the long term, well, that's probably above 5 years, thereabouts. This aims at developing viable long-term strategies which will ensure long-term survival and growth. So long-term is the planning horizon, and budgets can be put into place to anticipate what areas the management wish to develop in the future, what areas they wish to run down, what are the budgets that are likely to be in place given current expenditures and given what they know about the market. But really looking into the future, into the very long term like this, the long-term budget, the figures are really estimates and are not very reliable. They are subject to assumptions, and the assumptions must be made explicit. But you can imagine budgets taking place at 3 levels. The immediate, the short term. In the medium term, well, that's when you can phase in changes over a short period, but the changes can be phased in, some corrections can be made. And in the long term, that is the planning horizon. Now just a couple of words about budgets themselves, and this overlaps with material in other videos, but just another point here on this one. Well, a budget is really a mathematical model of the firm, built upon a series of calculations and assumptions about the strategies and objectives of the business. That's what a budget is. It summarizes the objectives of the business. It states where expenditure should take place. In other words, it's telling the observer that these budgets are important, this is where the items of expenditure are, therefore this is the type of business that is running. And since the budgets are in quantifiable terms, it is really a mathematical model. The budgets have a relationship between each other. The transport budget and the marketing budget may be linked because marketing people use transport. So there are mathematical links, there are relationships between the budgets. And which items appear in which budget is really an accounting issue determined by the management accountants. Budgets may cover many areas of the business. The operational, the here and now, what's happening right now in the business, the operational, what's being done at the moment, the organizational, the budget for how the organization functions, how it's split up and how it's managed, and the managerial function itself, who's responsible for what and which budget is the salary drawn from. Financial, well, financial is looking at all of the processes to summarize the financial status of the business and make sure that the business is presenting a true and fair view of itself, and also that the internal information is as accurate as possible so that proper decision making can be made. And the physical, the layout of the plant, the capital, the design, the warehousing, and so on. So there are different ways in which budgets can be applied within the business. And each of the budgets is really a mathematical model. It's a quantitative model. It shows what has been allocated and what has been spent. It's a very simple mathematical model. Having said that, it shows what's been allocated and what has been spent. A last point which overlaps with another class on flexible budgets, but just worth putting it in here because everything I've said up to now suggests that there is a budget and the budget lasts for a certain period of time, and after which there is another budget. Well, it's possible to have incremental budgets for a specific period, and these are determined with reference to what was spent or achieved during the last period, perhaps an allowance for anticipated changes. So incremental budgeting could take an existing budget and apply it in the next time period and just change some of the figures in line with, let's say, inflation. And that's incremental. But it's also possible that there could be flexible budgeting, as mentioned in a separate video. And flexible budgeting means that the budget itself has to be flexible to allow for changing costs and changing volumes of output. So there are different approaches to budgeting that are important to note. Now, in this class I've included some issues about budgeting. I've looked at towards the end the idea of it being some sort of quantitative model of the business and indicated the types of budgets that could exist. And then I went on to talk about the possibility of incremental budgeting, which means you take the budget and you change it in line with what you know to be the figures from the external environment, for example inflation or underlying cost changes. Now, this class fits with several other classes on the site and should be viewed with those, in conjunction with those. Stop the video from time to time, make your own notes, and pad out your notes by research and reading the PDFs. And look at the other videos as well and do the same thing. In the meantime, let's leave it at that. There are some sources that you may come across in your wider reading. But for the moment, we'll conclude this video and thank you for watching.